You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have registered dietitian and entrepreneur Liesel Maddox. Liesel has experience working as a clinical dietitian in inpatient eating disorder treatment centers and currently provides outpatient nutrition counseling to clients in recovery from eating disorders. Liesel also recently started an online business with the mission of helping Christian women break free from diet culture and disordered eating. In today's episode, she shares about how important it is to come to the food freedom conversation through a biblical lens and how to honor your body in the way that the Lord designed without dieting, disordered eating, or fixating on weight loss and appearances. You also won't want to miss how diet culture manifests in the church. This was a super interesting perspective to the intuitive eating conversation, so let's dive in. Hello, Liesel. Welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Liesel and I, just some backstory, are fellow frogs, and that was a fun season to share together. But I would love to just hear about what your life looks like right now. You've been doing a lot of traveling, which looks so cool.
Yes, I got married in this last July of 2022, to my best friend who's in the Air Force and never thought I would be a military wife. I grew up in a whole military family, but had kind of resolved myself to not wanting to be a military wife. And then, of course, the Lord has other plans and a great sense of humor. So here I am. And we moved from Texas to Colorado this last January, bought our first home and have been enjoying just doing all the Colorado things. And we're in Colorado Springs, which is absolutely beautiful. I mean, you turn down the street and Pikes Peak is like staring at you. We can see it from our bedroom window. And having been in Texas for the last 6.5 years before that, there are just so many more opportunities for getting outside. I had picked up skiing again in 2020, after not doing it for like 15 years. And so now that we live here, I've been able to go a whole lot more often. We're in like Breckenridge or Keystone at least once or twice a month now since moving here. But the opportunities just be outside and go hiking, or just the fact that like you go on walks here and you're staring at the mountains, which you don't get in Texas.
Oh, for sure.
Has been really, really sweet. So I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, if you had told me literally 12 months ago where we would be living and what life would look like, I would not have believed you, because I had so much of like my plan of how I thought it was going to look, and God's plan just radically changed that. And I think he's been continuing to teach me that throughout my entire life and probably still will. But it's been really, really sweet, and we're loving Colorado. It's been awesome.
Yeah. How did I not know that you were a military spouse? That is so cool. Dang.
I would not have necessarily planned it that way. But again, God's plan was just so much better, and it's been really, really cool, really sweet. And I think he prepared my heart in a lot of ways for that. Like being a military kid, watching my mom be a military spouse for, over 20, 25 years.
Oh, wow.
So I would say I'm somewhat prepared for things. I kind of put other aspects like deployments just totally in the back of my mind. I'm like, I'll deal with that when we get there. But
right.
Yes.
Wow. So was your mom or dad the service member growing up?
My dad, he was Air Force. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So you kind of have a feel for things, but I can totally resonate with what you said about, I joked with the Lord, and I remember like in college having these conversations with friends being like, I would never do military. It's just, the Lord like smiles at my humor with myself. But yeah, we're in the thick of it. Joseph's like in and out with trainings right now. I found out last week we were supposed to move this fall, but Joseph's in the Army, so it's a little bit different, but we're supposed to move this fall. Turns out we may not move till next January, just
Mhm.
casual life things.
You never know. You just got
Yeah.
to be flexible. Yes. Yeah. I think as a wife, it brings out so many like inward character qualities that I've had all along. You've probably had all along that now
Oh, for sure.
like you have to be flexible. You have to be have a certain amount of independence if they're gonna be gone for however long.
Right.
Um, Loving him and supporting him, I'm like, there's nothing else I would rather do. Like this is our life now.
Yeah. So I definitely mentioned it on another podcast episode, but I think it was so sweet to see, like, I remember having the conversation with a friend really early on when we had just moved. We started in Georgia. I, Joseph, like, we got to Georgia, we walked into our apartment, and then, like, that week that I got there, he was like, great, I'm leaving for the field for 2 weeks. Like, peace out.
Hmm.
And I think it was just like the Lord's kindness, because whatever facade I had of control over my life, the military completely removed that, which we don't have control, period, whether you're civilian or in a military lifestyle.
Hmm.
But I think it was just in the Lord's kindness during that season, literally within a month of our marriage, God was like, no, you have nothing outside of me. So let's just like get that straight and then we can build from there.
Yes, and so much better to realize that early on than 10, 15, 20 years down the road being frustrated with the lack of control, but just surrendering to it.
Yeah, definitely. And that was even just a conversation this morning. My husband, he had just finished a training cycle. So we got to see him for a surprise visit that we were anticipating to see him. But then this morning he was like, yeah, so just in case I'm keeping a pulse on things, I might be leaving in July. I was like, great, you weren't supposed to leave till August. It's fine. So that's not to
Yep.
say the frustration isn't there, but it's been really cool to see the Lord fill the gaps of all of those areas when I'm in the midst of this really sucks
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
like be enough. Like we had the opportunity to stay with family for an extended period of time so that my son and I could like have extra hands. Like it's just been really cool in the midst of the hard to see the Lord's like provision over everything, because he promises those things. But it's so hard to
Yeah.
like conceptualize when you're watching everything from afar, or like watching this impending mountain versus being in the midst of it and being like, I have nothing else to do but trust you right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love to hear about, what did life look like for you post college outside of the military? I know that you're doing all the dietitian things, so I would love to dive in there.
Yes, I after graduating from college, I was kind of fortunate enough to get a job in the eating disorder field right away. I had been told in college that that was a hard field to get into as a dietitian, like fresh out of school. But I kind of just had my mind set on it and trusted that, like, I know this is God's calling for my life. And so we're going to see what happens. And I did get a job work as an outpatient dietitian right away, which means seeing clients once a week. It's not in like a hospital setting, but more of, kind of what people know therapy looks like, where maybe you're seeing your therapist once a week. So I was doing that as a dietitian for about the first year. And then I started working for an eating disorders treatment facility that provides inpatient care, residential care, and then some different what we call levels of care, where someone may not be
Mm,
like staying overnight at a hospital setting, but they're still getting more intense care than they would be just once a week in outpatient. And
gotcha.
that was, I mean, a huge catalyst in my learning and growth as a clinician in the field of eating disorders, just to be able to see, sometimes having patients who are really, really sick with their eating disorders.
Mm,
Whether they had gotten to a point that was just really serious in their physical health and their mental health, or unfortunately seeing patients come back time and time
wow,
again to
yeah.
treatment. Um, Really just taught me so much as a dietitian and the people I was working with. Some of the top eating disorder, psychiatrists and
Mm,
psychologists, at least in the state of Texas, but with the company I was with, I would argue also in the nation, because these people are very, very good at what they do. Um,
yeah.
and again, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I would still be working for them, wanting to, grow in leadership in that company. And the Lord had other plans, and I am continually seeing that the Lord's plans are always better. And so
Mm.
when my husband and I, in doing some premarital counseling, he was going to get out of the military. A year ago, we had
Oh,
plans for him to
wow.
get out. And then
Okay.
within 6 weeks from our wedding, we completely, God turned that plan upside down and decided, seeing things on paper, we were like, it's just going to be much wiser for him to stay in the military than to get out. And
Hmm.
so that meant that I moved down from Dallas to Georgetown, Texas, outside of Austin to be with him. I did get to transition with that eating disorder treatment facility company to their
Okay.
location in Austin, Texas, where I was doing a different role, still working with clients with eating disorders, but instead of it being like inpatient or residential level, it was a little less acute than that. Um, but we also knew that he had another assignment coming up very soon. So we were only there for about 5 or 6 months. And then we got the assignment to Colorado, which allowed me to transition to a fully outpatient position again, where I contract with an outpatient nutrition practice that's actually based in Dallas, working with
Oh,
a
cool.
woman, a dietitian who was one of my first preceptors through my internship and
Wow.
supervisors at my first job. And then she started her own practice that I now contract with, where I get to see clients, again, once a week because they're at the level that they don't need more like intensive eating disorder care at this point,
Hmm.
or maybe they never needed that in the first place and we're just working on their relationship with food and, people who have some disordered eating patterns that they're getting out of. And it has been honestly just super, super sweet the way that
Mm.
this role has allowed me to honestly just show up as a wife, like the kind of wife that I want to be.
Right.
We don't have kids yet, but I feel so much more confident that like this kind of role as a dietitian will allow me to show up as the mom that I want to be someday.
Hmm.
And it's also allowed me to start my own business on the side as well,
Yeah.
starting a new business fully online based, with the goal of working with Christian women who want to stop dieting, get out of disordered eating, you know, heal their relationships with food and their bodies through learning intuitive eating and doing that from a faith-based approach. So I really honestly just feel like the Lord has been so kind in the way that plans changed over the last year to allow me to grow into this phase of life, providing support for clients in eating disorder recovery, and then also starting my own business and kind of just like combining all of those passions at the same time while allowing me to, you know, be the kind of wife I want to be and
Right.
my husband to fully say like yes to the military and be able to go where we need to go with that.
Mm. Yeah. I totally resonate with that. I would love to hear about what did it look like for you to get started in this field? Or rather, what was your own story that pushed you into being like, no, I have to do this for other people?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. Um, I mean, long story short, my passion for eating disorders and helping people find freedom with food absolutely comes from my own story, which so often in the field of eating disorders or dietitians who are working more in the food freedom, non-diet space, I think it really
Right.
does stem from personal experience. I My eating disorder story actually started when I was like 12 years old.
Oh,
And
wow.
I very quickly went from having an interest in being healthy at 12 years old to having a full blown eating disorder within a few months. Um,
Wow.
very, very obvious like weight changes, physical changes happening right around the time that I'm like developing as a little girl. And
Right.
um, so I had a pretty severe eating disorder for about a year and a half, 2 years before I even really got care for that. Once I did start working with a dietitian, my pediatrician had referred me to see the dietitian because I think at that point the pediatrician saw that like, this 14-year-old
Mm.
year old obsessed with weight and, with some pretty obvious changes physically, something's going on here. And
Yeah.
so thankfully the dietitian I was referred to was actually on base. There was no guarantee this person would have been like an eating
Wow.
disorder expert, but
Right.
thankfully I think just in like the Lord's plan for my life, this person had actually worked with eating disorders for over 6 years before, taking a job contracting with the military. And so that dietitian was super influential in helping me get into eating disorder recovery. Because I think at that point, as a 14 or 15-year-old, I would have said like, hey, something isn't right here. Like this is more than just having an interest in being healthy and working out. And I was doing competitive dance at the time, which was absolutely a role in my eating disorder development. Um, but I did at that point get support. I was seeing a dietitian, I was seeing a therapist, had, check-ins with my doctor. I never had to go to an eating disorder, treatment center. But by the time I got to the dietitian, I think I was in a little bit better of a spot. Had it been a year ago, I think absolutely I would have been like in
Mm-hmm.
residential care for my eating disorder
Right.
because of how serious it was. But I think just honestly, through a lot of the Lord's provision, He did reveal things to me that I started to see even as a teenager. Like, I do not want the rest of my life to look this way with food. I don't want a calorie count for the rest of my life. I don't want to be obsessed with food or, so distressed about my weight for the rest of my life. And so I was in eating disorder recovery in high school. I would say that by the time I graduated high school, I was like fully recovered. But it
Mm-hmm.
honestly hasn't been till I've been an adult and now a dietitian in this space where I look back and see so many ways that even though I was recovering from my eating disorder, I still had a lot of like disordered eating tendencies that I held on to that I think I would have still labeled as like, this is just healthy eating, or, I have to get my workout in every day. And I think my journey of healing has really been characterized by the Lord just like slowly but surely taking me on that journey of healing. It hasn't always been like overnight changes and radical realizations. It's more of like slowly noticing like, hey, these things aren't like fully normal or natural in how I want my relationship with food or my relationship with exercise and my body to look. And so it has been kind of a slow progression. But by the time I got to college, thankfully, TCU's program actually is phenomenal for dietitians.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like it was another catalyst for my relationship with food and exercise to heal more. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of dietitians who struggle in their own relationship with food and maybe even have a full-blown eating disorder. But by the time I
Mm.
got to college and had been recovering for a while, it was even more of a catalyst for me, I think, to heal in that way. And at that point I knew I had heard the Lord so clearly. When I was a teenager, I can remember like being in the car driving at one point when thinking about all this stuff and just hearing the Lord tell me that like I have not brought you through all of this for it to be in vain, and I will
Mm.
use your story to help other people.
I just got chills.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to enter the field of eating disorders to help other people. And again, I had been told like that's going to be hard to break into right away, and yet the Lord just opened doors for that to happen. So my study to be a dietitian, I really had that lens of like, how am I going to take everything I'm learning to help people in the food, freedom, and disordered eating space, knowing that like I have a message to share, I have a story to share, and I'm not just teaching people on paper things about, eating disorders and food freedom because I read about it in a book. I'm teaching
Mm-hmm.
people because it's absolutely changed my life, and I know what it feels like to be honestly just like in chains in your relationship with food, in your
Yeah.
relationship with your body, and I know what it feels like to be free from that, and it's so much better to
Mm.
not be in chains. So that is the long story short of my relationship with food, my body, exercise, and I think just how healing has looked um, slow and sure and steady,
Mm.
but it happens.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Moving forward, I would love a working definition because I know we've touched on some of this topic in another episode, but I would love a working definition of what is the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating patterns because I think they're very fluid on social media as we move towards this like diet culture dropout, which I'm super thankful for. Again, my story is similar to yours. At a very young age, I started having those feelings, those habits, and again, like our home life very much revolved around a restrictive eating pattern for the sake of health, Again, as an adult now realizing, wait a minute, that wasn't healthy.
Hmm.
But I would love just some clarity on that because I think in social media right now, those worlds and those words specifically are very blended when I don't think that they are or should be right now.
Yes, absolutely. Um, an eating disorder, I mean, there's very specific criteria from a medical standpoint and also from a mental health standpoint, for someone to receive an eating disorder diagnosis. But I would say that all eating disorders start as disordered eating, whereas not not everyone who struggles with disordered eating is going to develop a full-blown eating disorder, thankfully. I would say that because we're human and we're broken people living in a broken world, we've got bodies that experience, brokenness physically and, with our mental health sometimes too.
Right.
I would say almost anyone has some measure of disordered eating. Like, no one has a quote
Mm-hmm.
perfect relationship with food, but we live in a
Right.
culture that's so saturated by diet culture, mixed messages about nutrition and food, that it's almost impossible for anyone to have a relationship with food that's completely free of disordered eating. But I think the where it is on the spectrum of disordered eating can be so different for people. Um, so when someone's struggling with disordered eating, that could have started by just innocent dieting or the pursuit of, yeah, I want to get healthy, whether that means weight loss for someone or more of a fixation on all things like clean eating and kind of when wellness goes too far and that starts to become more
Mm-hmm.
disordered. And unfortunately, that so often can snowball into a full-blown eating disorder, um, when it was never intended to be that way.
Yeah, super helpful just because I know those words are very fluid right now. But like you said, there's specific criteria that people should see professional help in diagnosing because I know that there's probably a lot of self diagnosis just as people are starting to have this conversation to begin with. Like I said, I think that's the culture shift around talking about this is really helpful. But like I'm a nutritionist myself, and even I think going through my own program I was looking at some of this stuff and I was like, this is outdated. And I'm reading a textbook from things that like
Hmm.
is not even relevant and I would not even teach to my son who's just now learning to eat solid foods and build his plate.
Right, right.
So I would just love to hear about how does this biblical lens influence how you view intuitive eating? Like where does the Bible come to start talk about any of this stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I love talking about this. Um, I see kind of like two main points that stick out in my mind the most. One is just kind of the big picture of when we have, a more free relationship with food and our bodies and exercise, when we're not obsessing over it, following strict food rules, diet rules, I think that really allows us to keep food and health in its proper place and not be creating an idol out of it. And I think if someone's a Christian and they're struggling in their relationship with food or fixating, hyper fixating on things, it is so easy for that to start to become an obsession and become an idol and a distraction in our relationship with the Lord rather than what I think he really intended it to be of, food is a gift and our bodies are tools that we have on this earth to get us through this life and glorify him, but we know that we're going to
Mm-hmm.
have perfect bodies in eternity. So, kind of big picture, intuitive eating and finding food freedom allows you to keep health and your view of food and your weight and your body really in its proper place instead of it
Mm-hmm.
becoming an idol in our lives. But practically speaking, I am continually blown away at how much intuitive eating and even the principles of intuitive eating really align with God's original design for our
Mm-hmm.
bodies. I think in the way that, God gave us hunger and fullness cues to literally help regulate our eating and to guide us in, when to eat, why we're eating, how much to eat.
Right.
Diet culture, disordered eating, all the different noise that's out there on social media and the internet when it comes to food and health and diets are very quick to tell us to ignore our hunger signals, to trick our bodies into feeling more full with food than we really are, to hack our metabolism, or some of those
Oh my
like
gosh.
buzzwords around it. God gave us hunger and fullness signals for a reason. Like, we have hormones in our body that communicate between our stomachs and our brains to tell us when we're hungry, and even like what the primary motivator behind our hunger is, when we're starting to feel full and feel satisfaction from our food. And intuitive eating strips away dieting and food rules so that you can get back in touch with those original cues that God gave you in your body. Um, Another point I really see it is in like the satisfaction and enjoyment of our food.
Yeah.
We see all throughout scripture how food is a gift. God literally created Adam and Eve and put them in a garden of all places with food all around them. And we know that in eternity there will be food, there will be feasting, and there will be no struggles in our relationship with food, or feeling guilt after eating, or feeling shameful if we feel too full. We see continually throughout the Bible that food is this good thing that God gave us. And a core principle of intuitive eating is to feel our satisfaction from food. And instead of, again, finding all these tips and tricks and hacks with dieting to choose the lower fat, lower calorie, lower sugar food that may not actually be as satisfying, intuitive eating teaches people to recognize and really feel satisfaction from food. Because honestly, there's plenty of research that has shown us that when you are eating more satisfying foods instead of the diet or, clean substitute for it, you actually might end up eating less overall. And not that the main goal in our relationship with food is always to eat less, because that's not the point. But when we're continually choosing diet substitutes instead of the real deal, it is more likely we're going to have to keep eating more to try to find that same satisfaction that we could have had in the first place if you chose your favorite food, like the food that you wanted all along. And so just seeing the parallels between God creating food as this good thing to be enjoyed, he didn't have to do that. That was honestly just like a common grace he chose to give us, that food tastes delicious, because he could have made it as simple as putting gas in your car to give us fuel.
Right.
He could have created our bodies to not need food at all, but he did. And he made food taste good too. And intuitive eating wants you to enjoy that with food, not to struggle with food or view it as the enemies. I think another point too, where it really intuitive eating aligns with the Bible, is in taking care of our bodies, taking care of our health without fixating on weight loss. And again, I think this is where focusing on weight loss or appearances can so easily become an idol. And throughout the Bible, again, we see some encouragements to take care of our bodies, but there's never any correlation to our bodies needing to look one certain way or stay thin or stay fit. I mean, those can be somewhat helpful goals for people depending on what their body needs, but overall, taking care of our bodies as temples of the Lord does not have to look like fixating on weight loss. And intuitive eating, one of the best parts about it, I think, as a dietitian, is it does not place the primary focus on weight. That's not to say that in the big picture of things, if someone is really struggling maybe with overeating or binge eating, that their body may not eventually lose some weight or kind of let go of some weight as they normalize their eating patterns. But the focus is not on weight loss. It's not a diet plan. And so it's going to help people create more sustainable, healthy habits that they can do for the rest of their life. And, weight changes might come along with that in the grand scheme of things, but it's not focused on, short-term fixes to see X number of pounds lost in X amount of time, which really isn't sustainable anyway. So those are some of the ways I really, at least lately, have been blown away by how intuitive eating really aligns with the Bible. And I sure hope that throughout the years, the Lord just continues to reveal some of those things, not just to me, but to everybody. I want everybody to see how your relationship with food can feel really free, but also honor God without obsessing over your health or your weight.
Oh, for sure. And I would have never thought about like the Adam and Eve picture. Like, you're so right. Like, if sin and brokenness was like the resulting manifestation is shame, like, I think that would be the number one feeling that I experienced in the midst of full disordered eating patterns. Like, it was the binge cycle to the shame that I even enjoyed something, or I ate off my macros, or even my workout plan didn't look the same that I had planned for the day because I didn't feel good and I was on my
Mm-hmm.
period. And like, cyclical fitness is a whole other topic, but like, I've found so much freedom from shame because, like you said, like, the Lord's intention wasn't for it to be an idol, but a complement to reflect all of the gifts that He's already given us. I think it's a place where we as believers have to really be intentional about protecting our heart, because even just scrolling on social media for 5 minutes is a place that I've been like, hold on, like,
Mm-hmm.
even in my own recovery, like, I have to be very cautious of the accounts that I'm following, like the fitness influencers, fitness moms, now that I'm in a season of motherhood postpartum, trying to like snap back, or
Mm-hmm.
all of the language around that, because that's something else. Like, I've even told people I currently weigh less than what I did in high school. And I remember like the first time I got on the scale postpartum and being completely blown away. And that was like the first gentle shift the Lord gave me of like, wait a minute, your identity isn't in your weight. Your body has completely
Mm-hmm.
changed. Even if I hadn't had a baby, because you're not
Yes.
15, you're in your mid 20s. Um, so I think you just made a great point by like recognizing the Lord's goodness and original intent wasn't fixation. And that just shows so much of like our human brokenness, is the fixation on the creation versus the creator.
Oh my gosh, yes. That is such a great way to put it.
I think for me personally, at this point in my own personal journey and where I counsel friends and people that I meet, is the biggest mistake that people can make on initially healing is restriction, or thinking that, like, I have a friend that I'm working with personally right now, and I'm like, hey, if you want a donut every day, sure. If you would like some pizza for dinner with your kids, go for it. Like, it's not this place of, there's a difference between fat loss and weight loss, just to make that distinction. But I think the number one mistake I made early on was thinking that restriction was the way to reach any kind of body composition goal, and not understanding that intuitive eating can also do that. But like you said, we don't always have to change our bodies, and we don't always
Mm-hmm.
have to look smaller. So what would you say is the like hot button number one mistake that people might be making and
Right.
not realizing when they start in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, jumping straight to restriction, and I'd even say like control over your relationship with food. People so often want to have control. They want, step by step guidelines for whether it's with food or with weight or exercise. People want to be told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so often what I hear as a dietitian, people coming to me, they want a meal plan. They want
Mm,
diet rules to follow. And intuitive eating is the complete opposite of
yeah.
that. There's some guiding principles, and I think there's so much benefit in someone working with a dietitian to start eating intuitively, to have more structure and support. But structure and support are not synonymous with restriction and control.
Mm,
And when you focus too much on restricting and control, whether that looks like starting another diet or getting more intense on someone counting calories or counting macros, or following a really strict meal plan or workout plan, if that is not going to heal your relationship with food, it's only one more, notch on your belt of different things someone is trying in
mm-hmm.
order to control their weight or control, maybe there's different health outcomes they're wanting to see, but going about it in a way that's more damaging to their metabolism and even mental health than
Yeah.
finding a free relationship with food. So I would say, and I would highly encourage people, when you're at that point of feeling tired and frustrated with the way things are still a struggle in your relationship with food or your relationship with your weight and your body, the answer is not one more diet or a little bit more control, a little bit more restriction. It's actually the opposite. It's stripping those things away and trusting that God has given you the tools that you need inside your body to regulate your relationship with food, to notice how your body feels and respond to that, with how you're moving your body, how you're exercising and things like that. And just trusting that it will be okay, that you don't have to take one more ounce of, control and restriction to try to fix things.
Yeah. So if control and restriction is the number one don't, what would be 3 do's or encouragements that you would give to someone first starting out?
Yeah, I would say, I always want to say, like, if you're struggling, work with somebody. Work with, find someone who's really going to support you in your goals, who knows what they're talking about, who can help you get from point A to point B without feeling alone or continuing to feel frustrated, because that is an investment that is worth your time and your money for a lifetime of freedom with food. And the cool thing is, we do see intuitive eating, not controlling things with food, does improve long-term health outcomes. 20 years ago, when intuitive eating was kind of on the rise, there weren't as many studies about it. Like, we didn't have as much research yet because it was newer. We didn't know. And now, 20 to 25 years later, we have hundreds of research studies that have been done on intuitive eating that look at someone's health outcomes and actually see, wait a second, people who are eating intuitively and not intentionally dieting are actually having better health outcomes, lower risk of disease.
Right.
Maybe their blood work is looking better than people who are continuing to diet and micromanage things with food. So all that to say, work with somebody who can help you. But I would say a couple things that I teach my clients when they're first getting started really comes down to shifting your mindset and your perspective around how you're viewing food. Some of the top points that might seem radical to some people, and other people might be like, okay, I already do this, would be not viewing or labeling food as good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, clean or dirty, whatever black and white terms you want to enter in there. And instead viewing food as more positive, from a positive lens, and seeing that all food does provide our body with nutrition. All food provides our body with energy. Calories are literally units of energy, and carbohydrates are your body's number one preferred source of energy. The only source of energy that can cross the blood-brain barrier is energy from carbohydrates. And so when you start to view food through a positive lens instead of through a negative lens, and you're not seeing it as the enemy anymore, that is the first step in really freeing yourself from being in those chains of dieting and disordered eating. And I think something that happens when you do that is you're no longer moralizing food. And this is where I think we could get into an interesting conversation as Christians too. The fact that,
for sure.
Yes, God created food, but food is food. It's really no more than that. And what happens when we label food as good and bad or healthy and unhealthy is too often people take that and project it onto themselves, which leads to people saying things or thinking things like, I ate really bad today, like, therefore I am bad. Or, feeling so guilty for what they had, or, thinking that, like, well, because I ate a bad food or an unhealthy food, I feel bad, or like I did something wrong. And when you take away those black and white labels from food, it helps to not moralize it anymore. Food does not have morals. It is food. It's an object. It provides our body with nutrition and energy, but it is no more powerful than that. And so you're taking away the power from food to tell you how to feel or to tell you who you are as a person, whether you're feeling good or bad or healthy or unhealthy, and keeping food in its proper place when you're not labeling it like that. So I would say that's a place to start too, is just checking your language around food. How are you labeling food? How are you viewing food? And as hard as it may be to get started, just not thinking about food as good or bad, healthy, unhealthy anymore, and seeing it as all food provides your body with nutrition. All food provides your body with energy. We do want to eventually get to the point of having balance and moderation and variety with food, but you don't have to
Right.
label foods as good and bad and healthy, unhealthy, clean, dirty to get to that
Yeah.
point of really feeling more balanced with food.
Yeah. And I think it's orthorexia, so correct me on that. But I think it's super important to come into this conversation as I've learned more about the shift from what I thought I was eating healthy or clean in college, thinking, oh, yeah, low calorie Greek yogurt or zero fat milk was better for me nutritionally, like the nutrition profile itself, than raw dairy or some of these other whole
Mm-hmm.
foods. But I even fell from one side of the spectrum to the other, thinking that, oh, if I do not have all 100% organic, no preservatives, I can never eat pizza, forget the donuts, was just as damaging as thinking that I had to bring my own Greek yogurt to Chipotle instead of ordering sour cream because I've done that.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where I'd encourage people too is like it really starts by examining the why behind what you're doing with food and with your body and really asking yourself like what is your full definition of health? Because if pursuing
Mm,
health means missing out on valuable, social experiences and relationships, or it's taking the focus off of your spiritual health, or maybe it's work, maybe it's school, maybe it's family life, I would argue that is not the full pursuit of health and everything that God wants for us in our health. And so really examining if your behaviors with food and with exercise are creating more difficulty or distress in our everyday life, like literally just disrupting everyday life, it's
yeah.
probably not a normal relationship with food. Whether the goal for someone comes
Mm-hmm.
down to weight loss and appearances or kind of more orthorexia tendencies of like everything
Right.
being, as like pure and clean and healthy as possible, either way,
Right.
if that's disrupting everyday life, that's not going to help you get to the point of fully experiencing God's goodness in your whole health.
Mm.
And whole health means physical and spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, relational health
Yes.
too.
Absolutely. I think that's just good language in general and a good like temperature check in daily life is like, is this disruptive? Is this thought pattern disruptive? Is this behavior disruptive? Is the way that I feel after, going grocery shopping like disruptive? So I think that's good, just like temperature check to bring people back to like a place of surrender and also just like evaluation of like, what does this mean mentally, physically, and emotionally, like you said. So, I would love to dive into kind of what has been the pushback or tension as you've stepped
Mm-hmm.
into the social media, like virtual entrepreneurship, and going virtual with your practice. Because I think I saw on Instagram the other day, you were just like talking about the comments that people make, which just like blows me away, you know, with some of the comments that people make or assumptions about food and nutrition. Because it's a very broad realm now. I think that anybody can claim to be a nutritionist. I think anybody can claim to be a fitness or nutrition guru on Instagram, but I would just love to hear some of your experiences and how
Mm-hmm.
you've navigated that gracefully.
Yes. Yeah. The virtual world with so much at our fingertips, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Oh my gosh, it's a whole ball of wax. I went into this knowing that if I'm gonna do this, like I need to have my faith be a component of what I'm gonna do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, through the different work experiences I've had, which I'm so grateful for how I've grown and learned as an eating disorder dietitian, to a certain extent, you can't necessarily express your faith in the same way that when you're starting your own business, whether it's in person or an online platform, it is your
Mm-hmm.
decision for how much of that you want to have. And I just
Right.
felt this like heart conviction that like I can't do
Mm.
this and not have faith as a component. Like it's both a business and it's a ministry as well.
Right.
The most pushback I would say I've seen is in talking about health and weight. And then when we even get into, things like overeating or gluttony, in the
Okay.
church, people can get pretty, I want to say maybe defensive pretty fast, but I have to remind
Mm-hmm.
myself that, like, I am here to serve Christian women who are struggling in their relationship with food. I am not here to argue with the middle-aged Christian man who's got some different viewpoints. I'm like, I know I've got to, especially on the internet, you got to pick your battles with who are you
Right.
serving and how can you really reach those people. But I have definitely been blown away and saddened by just the way that, especially on the internet, we see so much diet culture in the church. Um,
Mm.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had experiences even in person of being in a church setting or around other believers, and so quickly the conversation turns to weight loss and dieting. I think oftentimes there's this underlying tone of, not just in the church but also in our culture, of the glorification of thinness and the demonizing of fat. And
Mm.
that's a I mean there's a whole conversation
Yeah.
we could probably have around that, but I think as believers we have to be really careful in um, how we are treating our brothers and sisters in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's judging another person or making assumptions about someone's eating patterns or relationship with food based solely off of how their body looks, I would really argue that's not very Christ-like.
Yeah.
Um, so I've seen where people, Christians, I think, can get stuck on weight loss equaling health. And, I know we've kind of
Mm.
already in this conversation broken down where we need to be more careful about zeroing in on weight loss or appearances. Um, but I think there's some judgment that can happen too when believers are looking at someone who might be at a higher body weight or in a larger body and assuming, hey, that must mean you're overeating. That must mean maybe you have binge eating
Mm.
tendencies, and they
Right.
just wrap it up and might call it like the sin of gluttony. And
Yeah.
if you had asked me like a couple months ago my thoughts on that, I would have like honestly not really known where to start. But I think in the last few months of being more active on social media in this realm and learning from other Christian dietitians in this space, it's really helped me to see the distinction that gluttony gluttony is a heart sin, and gluttony
Yeah.
is not first, an outward sin of like our eating patterns or anything. It truly starts where all sin does, in our hearts.
Right.
Gluttony could be, with food, but it could also be with alcohol or money or drugs or sex.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
um and there's no requirement, I guess, that someone struggling with the sin of gluttony is in a certain body size. Anyone of any weight, body shape, or size could be struggling with that heart sin of gluttony. But where I've seen
Right.
some really harmful and just like honestly super insensitive things with, conversations among believers, even like some like even just like silly Christian meme accounts, is
Mm-hmm.
looking at people in larger bodies in the church and saying like that's gluttony, that's what you need to fix first, when as a dietitian in this space I have worked with plenty of people who are at higher body weights who are actually
Yeah.
under eating or have really disordered
Right.
relationships with food. Not everyone who's at
Yes.
a higher body weight is binge eating. Yes, I mean there
Yes.
are actually a lot of people in our population struggling with binge eating disorder. That's the most common eating disorder above anorexia or bulimia. But
Mm.
just because someone's at a higher body weight doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're struggling with. And so
Right.
I think it's important for Christians to just take a step back, to approach our brothers and sisters in Christ with love and support, that whether or not someone's struggling in their relationship with food, how can we support them in that instead of making a joke out of it? That's the worst thing we could
Yeah.
do because, again, as someone who's walked through my own disordered eating disorder experience, and now I work with people in that space, these are real people with real
Mm-hmm.
lives and real feelings. And, our relationships with food are so incredibly personal to us. Sometimes they're really hard to talk about. Sometimes they do bring up a lot of shame. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think the best thing we can do as believers, whether it's in person or it's on the internet, is really just trying to approach people with love and with grace instead of making assumptions about their eating patterns or assumptions about their weight, there's no requirement in the Bible that weight and being in a smaller body equals holiness. There's just not, so separating
Yeah.
that, like, weight loss and thinness and health has no guarantee in its role in our sanctification. So that may have been a little bit more, a little bit deeper than just the answer in terms of pushback on social media, but
No, that's perfect. And it's something that I've even had to contemplate for myself because that's never been a part of my story. Or maybe I just like haven't seen it in the church culture, but that's like really fascinating and just like grieves me to think about the fact that people have experienced that level of, I think, judgment within the church walls. But I have never considered it being from a like eating disorder appearance kind of conversation.
and even just the way I think this is an area where the church ends up looking a whole lot like the world instead of being set apart. And we see that sometimes even just in the passive jokes that might be made, with in a pastor's message when they say something about like joking about their own weight or joking about how much they ate. You never know how a member of your church may be feeling if they're struggling with a full-blown eating disorder, they're struggling with chronic dieting, and they hear an influential leader saying something like that, and it is harmful. And so I think the church in the last, I don't know, few years has gotten better about talking about mental health, anxiety, and depression, but there's more work to be done in terms of eating disorders, disordered eating, and just honestly how we view weight and health.
Yeah. What encouragement would you give like to the church if things could change, the Lord could sanctify all of that tomorrow? What encouragement would you give? I think just to be more intentional or cognizant of, I think, the people that you would steward.
Yeah, I think the short answer would be that weight loss alone and dieting is not the answer. And really recognizing that God did design our bodies with our own internal cues to follow. And honoring God and our relationships with our health does not have to look like diet rules, weight loss, going on the next diet or anything like that. And so I'd encourage, people in the church, whether they're a church leader because they're, they have a role like a pastor, or maybe they're leading a small group. Maybe it's just like conversations you have with your friends, just encouraging people to separate that view of seeing weight loss as the healthiest thing you can do for your body, because it's not always the healthiest thing.
Right. And it's not always the solution. Wow, that was just such a good encouragement, and I think like just a reality check, because I never would have considered that aspect of brokenness within the church. But it's definitely, like you said, now that I think back, like it's in the passive comments or offhanded jokes, or just like it's so embedded into our culture right now. Like we've said, like I think that recently the world is doing a little bit better and recognizing and calling brokenness for what it is. But I think that's definitely an area that needs growth, where we all do. So where can our community connect with you? Because it would be awesome to work with you, Liesel. All of those things.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at dietitian.liesel. I also have a Facebook page if someone is more on Facebook, and I'm in TikTok's like coming along, but that's a slower process. Instagram is definitely the best place you can find me. And right now since starting my own business, I'm offering virtual nutrition coaching for mostly Christian women wanting to break free from diet culture and disordered eating, to find food freedom. And I provide like coaching and counseling services, but really by walking through the intuitive eating principles and coming at it from a faith-based approach of talking about like, how does this align with God's initial design for our bodies and for food? And I really saw that as a resource that was lacking for believers. Yes. Like thankfully there are plenty of dietitians out there, nutritionists providing coaching services that are focused more on food freedom and intuitive eating. But I think it's an absolute game changer if you're a believer, when you can work with someone who's coming from that same lens, so that you're really focusing on whole health, your spiritual, your physical, mental, emotional health, and not leaving out that key piece of what God says about food in our bodies.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like, share a similar conviction, because it's like, if we're going to talk about health and wellness specifically, like, wellness is not just the way that you eat and the way that you move your body. Like, and as a believer, like, if we're going to be real about it, like, you need to be intentional about your spiritual health. Like, are you spending time in the Word? And if you are spending time in the Word, like, and the Lord is doing his job to change your heart, then like that changes the way that you see your workouts. It changes the way that you approach food. It changes the way that you may look at your mental health and the way that you speak to yourself and all of those aspects of wellness. So totally agree here. I'm going to be one of your number one supporters. So I will link all of those things. And as we close, I have one more closing question that we have for all of our guests. So if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
Yeah. Oh man. I think if I were both speaking to my 12 or 13-year-old self, or my 18-year-old self, even my 23-year-old self, just reminding myself that the journey to make peace with food and to make peace with your body is a long one. It's a lifelong journey. It's not an overnight fix. It's not going to happen overnight. That's where it really differs from the false promises that come from diet culture. But I look back and there were so many times that I felt really uncomfortable in my body, based on my body image, maybe where I was struggling. I felt overwhelmed in my relationship with food. But I've seen now in my own life personally, and now how I get to support clients, that even though healing doesn't happen overnight, it happens slowly but surely when you take the step to trust that God's design for your body is good and that this can happen, and you're just patient with it. It doesn't matter how many times or how many years someone's struggled in their weight with their body and their relationship with food. It is 100% possible to live the rest of your life free from the burden of, constantly fighting against your weight, trying another diet, feeling uncomfortable in your body. Intuitive eating and food freedom is so worth it, because it is a lifelong investment in your whole health and your whole wellness. And I can say personally in my own life, it was so worth it, and it was worth being patient. And that's what I would absolutely hope for someone else too.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Liesel, for this conversation. I think that you are providing an incredible service, because I think that this sphere is severely lacking in a biblical perspective of what healing looks like. So I'm just super appreciative of you filling the gap for so many women, because I know that even in my own life, that would have been so helpful. So thank you so much for this conversation. We loved having you.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to be here.
Yeah, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.